Ready to like level up your communication game? Because today we're going deep on a book that says it's got the secrets to unlocking some serious connection. And I'm not just talking about, just getting your point across. This is about like communication that could change your whole career, your relationships, even just those daily things that drive us crazy sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. It's called Replicable Communication Power. And it's written by this guy, Fan Deng, who's a big deal in Chinese business. And what's so interesting is how Deng's like, hold on, communication. It's way more than just words. He says it's like the bedrock of society.
I mean, he's not wrong, right? Think about it, like almost everything we do involves communication in some way.
Exactly. But he goes even further. He says the real point of communication isn't to just get someone to say yes. It's to get to this place of real, like heartfelt understanding.
Okay, so we're aiming for heartfelt understanding, but if it were that easy, we wouldn't need this deep dive, would we? So why does communication go so wrong so often?
Well, Deng's take on this is really cool. He says a lot of our communication breakdowns, they come from fear, like a primal fear of losing control. He calls it the reptilian brain response.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you know that fight or flight thing when we feel threatened.
Right.
So when someone disagrees or we feel like our ideas aren't valued, it triggers this fear. And then we lash out, we shut down, or we try to like dominate the conversation.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. It's like you're trying to be rational and then suddenly you're yelling or getting all defensive. How do we like break out of that reptilian brain trap and get to that heartfelt understanding?
That's where Deng's framework comes in. He's got this 2x2 matrix to help us understand the different ways we communicate. One side of the matrix is how much we focus on our own needs when we're talking. And the other side is how much we focus on the other person's needs.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So walk me through it. What happens if we only focus on what the other person needs, not our own?
You get the people pleaser. They just want to make everyone else happy, even if it means they get walked all over. Always saying yes, avoiding conflict, struggling to set boundaries. You probably know some people like this.
Yeah, maybe even myself sometimes. Always trying to keep everyone happy and then ending up feeling resentful. What about the flip side then? High self-need but low other need.
That's controller territory. This is someone who's got to get their way, even if it means steamrolling everyone else. They might be effective in the short term, but they end up damaging relationships.
It sounds like the low self-need, low other need quadrant isn't a great place to be either, huh?
Definitely not. That's where you find the avoiders. They've basically given up on communicating effectively altogether. Deng calls it learned helplessness. They withdraw from conversations, avoid tough topics, or just don't express themselves at all.
Okay, so none of those sound particularly healthy, which leaves us with one quadrant, high self-need and high other need.
Bingo. This is where Deng's approach gets really cool. He calls this the respect and cooperation quadrant, and this is where everyone wins. You stand up for what you need, but you're also considerate of what the other person needs and how they see things. It's a win-win.
Okay, so that's the goal, respect and cooperation. But how do we actually get there? It sounds kind of like a fantasy.
And this is where Deng's book goes beyond just talking. He actually gives you specific steps you can take to move towards that quadrant.
I like that he uses real-life stories to show how it works. Like, there's this one about a printing company owner who was owed a ton of money by a client.
Oh, yeah, right.
And he was so frustrated, he was thinking about doing some shady stuff to get his money back.
Oh, wow.
But then he realized that forcing the client to pay wouldn't actually fix the problem. It might even ruin the relationship altogether.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So instead, he decided to try this respect and cooperation thing. He acknowledged that he needed to get paid, but he also tried to understand where the client was coming from and what problems they were facing.
Oh, what happened? Did it work?
It did. By focusing on helping each other and building a long-term relationship, he not only got paid, but he also gained a new business partner.
Wow, that's incredible.
It just shows you how powerful Deng's approach can be. It's not about winning an argument. It's about creating solutions that work for everyone.
That's a great example. And it highlights how important it is to shift our focus from getting our way to finding solutions that benefit everyone involved.
Exactly. It's not always about winning or losing. It's finding common ground and working together to achieve something positive.
And that's a key principle of effective communication. It's not a battle. It's a collaboration.
Absolutely. And Deng's book gives us the tools to make that collaboration happen.
Exactly. It's about building bridges, not walls.
I love that. Building bridges instead of walls.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way to sum up Deng's approach to communication.
It is. And it's something we can all strive for in our daily interactions, whether it's at work at home or even just with the barista at our favorite coffee shop.
Every interaction is a chance to build a bridge. And Deng's book gives us the blueprint.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. and that effective communication is the key to creating a more harmonious and fulfilling world.
And that's a world I definitely want to be a part of. So let's dive back into Deng's replicable communication power and see what other gems we can uncover.
That sounds good to me. I'm ready for more.
Back again with our deep dive into Fan Deng's replicable communication power. We've already talked about how, fear and our own needs can mess with how we talk to each other. But now I'm really curious about what Deng says about human needs in general.
Oh, that's a big part of his whole framework.
Mm.
He says you got to understand those needs if you want to communicate well. He even gives you a list of what he calls essential needs. It's kind of like a hierarchy, but for everyday life,
Okay, so break it down for me. What kind of needs are we talking about? Hopefully it's not as simple as everyone just wanting $1 million.
No, not quite that basic. Deng's list is way more down to earth and relatable. Like he talks about security needing to feel safe and protected both physically and emotionally. That's a universal right.
Makes total sense. We all want to feel safe. What else is on the list?
Connection and belonging. We're social creatures after all. Gotta feel like we're part of something.
Yeah.
Whether it's family, friends, colleagues, you name it.
Totally. Feeling like you belong is so important. Okay, what else? What other needs does Deng talk about?
He talks about autonomy and control. Feeling like we have some say in our own lives, like we're not just puppets.
It's like that feeling of being in the driver's seat, right? We all want that.
Yeah, exactly. It's about having agency, making choices that actually affect our lives.
I can see how those needs are things we all crave, whether we realize it or not. But how does knowing this actually help us communicate better?
Well, when you get that everyone's driven by these needs, yourself included, it becomes easier to see where they're coming from, even if they're acting in ways you don't get or you totally disagree with.
It's like putting on those X-ray glasses and seeing people's actions in a whole new light.
Exactly. It's not just about the words they're saying. It's about the deeper needs that might be driving their behavior.
So instead of getting frustrated or shutting down, I can try to figure out what need might be behind their actions.
Right. And that can help you respond in a way that's more understanding and productive.
It's not about excusing bad behavior, though.
Oh, definitely not. But understanding the root cause can help you address it way better.
Can you give me an example of how this works in a real situation?
Sure. Let's say you have a coworker who's constantly interrupting you in meetings. Instead of just thinking they're being rude, maybe consider if they're feeling insecure or like nobody's listening. Maybe they have a strong need for recognition or control.
So instead of snapping at them, hey, stop interrupting, I could try something like, I see you've got some great ideas, but how about we make sure everyone gets a chance to speak?
There you go. You're validating their need to be heard while also setting some boundaries.
It's a win-win again.
Exactly. And Deng actually gives you some really useful tools for navigating these tricky situations. One of my favorites is the idea of approaching communication with a gift-giving mentality.
Gift-giving. Okay, now you've got me curious. Tell me more about this.
It's all about shifting your focus. Instead of thinking, what can I get from this conversation? Think, what can I give? What knowledge, perspective, or support can I offer that might be valuable to this person?
I like that. It's so easy to get caught up in what we want out of a conversation. We want to win the argument, prove our point,
Yeah, exactly. But when you flip the script and think about what you can contribute, it changes the whole vibe.
So it's like coming to the table with something to offer instead of just showing up with an empty plate and expecting to be served.
Exactly. And that's a much more enjoyable experience for everyone involved. It's not about getting your way. It's about working together to find a solution that benefits everyone.
And sometimes that solution is as simple as just being a good listener.
Absolutely. Listening is a gift in itself. And it's often the most valuable thing we can give someone.
That's a good reminder. Sometimes we just need to shut up and listen. Okay, so gift giving in communication. What kinds of things can we actually give? Does it have to be something big and fancy?
Not at all. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest impact. Like a genuine compliment, giving someone your full attention for a few minutes, offering to help them with a task.
Yeah, it's the little things that often mean the most.
Right. And these small acts of generosity can create a ripple effect. They build trust and encourage others to do the same.
It's like that saying, what goes around comes around. If you're generous with your time and energy, people are more likely to reciprocate.
Exactly. And that creates a more positive and productive environment for everyone.
So far, so good. But what about those times when we have to deliver bad news or deal with a conflict? Those are never fun.
I know those are tough. But Deng doesn't shy away from them. He says that even when things get heated, we should still try to be respectful and create a space where people feel safe to talk.
I like that. Because sometimes you can't avoid conflict, right? Sometimes those tough conversations are necessary.
Absolutely. And Deng actually gives you some really practical tips for handling those situations.
Hmm.
One thing he suggests is using contrasting statements to kind of soften the blow and avoid making people feel attacked.
Contrasting statements. I'm not sure I get that. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's say you're a manager and you have to give an employee feedback on a report that's not so good. Instead of saying, this report is terrible, you can start by saying, I appreciate all the hard work you put into this report, B-O-U-T.
Ah, I see. You're acknowledging their effort before you deliver the not-so-great news?
Right. That but makes a big difference.
Hmm.
It helps the feedback feel less personal and more focused on the issue.
It's like a spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down.
Exactly. It's about being honest, but also being empathetic.
Okay, so contrasting statements. I'm adding that to my communication toolkit. What else does Deng suggest for dealing with conflict?
He also talks about the importance of emotion labeling.
Hmm.
It's basically just acknowledging how the other person's feeling, even if they haven't actually said it out loud.
So like tuning into their emotional state and reflecting it back to them.
Yeah, exactly. For example, if someone's getting all defensive in a meeting, you might say, I can see you're feeling frustrated. Can you tell me more about what's bothering you?
It seems so simple, but I can see how that would be really helpful. Instead of ignoring their emotions, you're acknowledging them and making them feel heard.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where it's okay to have those feelings.
Mhm.
And that can really help to de-escalate a tense situation.
Sometimes a well-timed apology can help too, right?
For sure. But Deng says we shouldn't apologize too much, especially when we didn't actually do anything wrong. He makes this interesting point about the difference between apologizing for our actions and apologizing for someone else's feelings.
Ooh, that's an interesting distinction. Tell me more.
Well, sometimes someone might be upset, even if it's not really your fault. In those cases, you can still acknowledge their feelings and say something like, I'm sorry you're feeling this way. Let's see if we can figure this out together.
So you're not taking the blame, but you're still showing empathy.
Exactly. And that can go a long way in those messy situations where everyone's feeling misunderstood.
And sometimes you just need to take a break from the conversation altogether, right? Like walk away and come back later when everyone's cooled down.
Oh yeah, sometimes that's the best thing you can do. Deng talks about the importance of addressing the emotional undercurrent before you try to solve the problem. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand. If emotions are running high, no point in even trying to have a rational discussion.
So first you gotta calm the reptilian brains down, validate everyone's feelings, and maybe even take a break.
Exactly. Once the emotional dust settles, then you can actually start tackling the problem.
This is all making so much sense. We've all been in those situations where everyone's so worked up that nothing productive gets done.
And that's where Deng introduces one of his most powerful communication tools, giraffe language.
Giraffe language. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Paint me a picture. What does talking like a giraffe even mean?
Well, it's based on this idea called nonviolent communication, which is all about empathy, understanding, and clear, compassionate communication.
Sounds very giraffe-like, peaceful and gentle.
Exactly. And there are three main principles to giraffe language: observation, feeling, and request. First, you just observe the situation objectively. No judgment or interpretation, just the facts.
So instead of saying you're always late, I'd say something like, I noticed you've been arriving late to our meetings lately.
Perfect. No accusations, just a neutral observation.
Okay, what's next?
Then you express how you're feeling about it.
Yeah.
Using I statements. For example, I feel a little anxious when this happens because it makes it hard to get things started on time.
Got it. Own your feelings, don't blame the other person, and then what?
Then you make a clear and specific request. Like, I'd really appreciate it if you could try your best to be on time for future meetings.
Okay, so it's not a demand or a criticism, it's a respectful request.
Exactly. And it's amazing how much more effective that approach can be.
It seems so much less confrontational and more collaborative.
Right. And that's the whole point of giraffe language. It helps you navigate those tricky conversations without putting the other person on the defensive.
I'm definitely adding giraffe language to my communication repertoire. What about when you have to give negative feedback, though? Can you really use this approach then?
Absolutely. In fact, it's especially helpful in those situations because it allows you to address the issue without attacking the person.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Instead of saying, your presentation was a total mess, you could try something like, I noticed that some parts of your presentation were a little unclear.
Okay, so you're starting with a neutral observation, and then what?
Then you share your feelings. I felt a
Mhm.
little confused during those sections because I wasn't sure what the main takeaway was.
And then the request.
Right. You could say, I would appreciate it if you could maybe work on clarifying those points for next time.
It's amazing how much better that sounds. It's direct, but not disrespectful.
Exactly. And it gives the person something concrete to work on. It's all about framing feedback in a way that's helpful, not hurtful.
This giraffe language is like a communication superpower. We've covered so much ground here. From the reptilian brain to the gift-giving mentality to talking like a giraffe. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But the good news is these are all practical tools we can start using right away. It's about being more mindful and intentional with how we communicate, even in the smallest of moments.
And that brings us to a part of the book that really blew my mind, nonverbal communication.
Ah, yes. The silent language. We often forget how much we communicate without even saying a word.
I used to think it was just about basic things like making eye contact and not fidgeting, but Deng goes way deeper than that, right?
He does. He connects nonverbal cues to our emotions. He says our bodies are constantly giving off signals, whether we realize it or not. And if we learn to read those signals, it's like having a secret decoder ring for communication.
So it's not just about noticing if someone's tapping their foot or avoiding eye contact. It's about understanding how their body language reveals their true feelings.
Exactly. Deng talks about micro-expressions, those tiny little facial movements that can give away our emotions even if we're trying to hide them.
It's like our faces are having a whole separate conversation.
He also talks about how our posture, tone of voice, even our breathing can reveal our emotional state.
So it's like our bodies are giant billboards broadcasting our emotions whether we like it or not.
That's a great way to put it. And the implications are huge.
Mm.
Imagine being able to sense when someone's feeling anxious or uncertain, even if they're saying all the right things. You could then adjust your communication style to make them feel more comfortable and build trust.
This is making me rethink all those times I felt awkward silences or sensed a disconnect between someone's words and their body language. There's so much going on beneath the surface.
Right. And it's all valuable information if you know how to read it.
But can we really learn to read those nonverbal cues accurately? I mean, it seems like something that takes years of training.
Ding believes we can. And he gives specific techniques for becoming more attuned to both our own nonverbal signals and the signals of others.
So it's not just about passively observing these cues. We can actually learn to use them intentionally to improve our communication.
Exactly. And Deng offers some great tips for projecting confidence and authenticity through our nonverbal communication.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
One simple but powerful technique is power posing. By adopting a confident posture, even if we don't feel confident on the inside, we can actually trick our brains into feeling more empowered.
Wait, are you saying that if I stand like Superman for 5 minutes, I'll suddenly become a fearless communicator?
Maybe not Superman, but the research on power posing is pretty cool. Studies have shown that our body language can actually influence our hormones and thoughts, making us feel more confident and less stressed.
Okay, I'm sold. I'm definitely going to try that before my next big presentation. What other nonverbal techniques does Deng recommend?
He also talks about the power of eye contact. It seems like such a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. When you make eye contact with someone, you're showing them that you're present, engaged, and confident in what you're saying.
But there's a balance, right? Too much eye contact can feel creepy.
Yeah, for sure. You don't want to stare people down. Deng says the key is to aim for a balance. Make eye contact for a few seconds, then look away briefly before re-engaging.
It's like a nonverbal dance.
Exactly. It's about finding that rhythm that feels natural and genuine.
Okay, so eye contact, power posing. What else is there?
Well, Deng also talks about the importance of paying attention to your tone of voice and your facial expressions. Even small changes in these areas can have a big impact on how your message is received.
So it's about being aware of how you're coming across, not just what you're saying.
Exactly. And it takes practice, just like any skill. The more you pay attention to your nonverbal cues and the cues of others, the better you'll become at reading and using them effectively.
All this talk about nonverbal communication has got me thinking about written communication too. We live in a world of emails and texts and instant messages. Does Deng have any advice for us in the digital age?
He does. He says even though there are no nonverbal cues in writing, a lot of the same principles still apply. You got to be clear, concise, and respectful in your language, even in casual emails or texts.
So no more angry rants to customer service, even when they mess up my order.
Even then. Remember, written communication is permanent. It can easily be misinterpreted or forwarded to others. Dang says we should treat every email and text like a formal letter. Take the time to craft your message carefully and respectfully.
That's a good point. It's so easy to fire off a quick text without thinking about how it might come across on the other end.
Right. And even those small interactions can have a big impact on your relationships.
This is also eye-opening. It's making me realize just how much of our communication, even online, is influenced by subtle things we might not even be aware of.
And that's what's so cool about Deng's book.
Mm-hmm.
He's encouraging us to become more conscious and intentional communicators, whether we're talking face-to-face, writing an email, or just sending a quick text.
It's about understanding that communication is more than just words. It's about building connections, fostering understanding, and creating a more positive world.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we all have the power to choose how we communicate. And those choices have a ripple effect on the world around us.
Powerful stuff. We'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into Fan Deng's replicable communication power and explore some of his final thoughts. We're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Fan Deng's replicable communication power. This book has seriously given me a whole new way of thinking about how we connect with each other.
It's been a wild ride, right?
Yeah.
From that reptilian brain stuff to talking like giraffes, Deng has given us so much to think about.
Absolutely. And one thing that's really stuck with me is the whole nonverbal communication thing. Like, I used to think it was just about making eye contact and trying not to fidget, the basics. But Deng goes so much deeper.
Right. He's all about how our bodies are constantly sending out these signals, even if we don't realize it. And those signals, they can say a lot about how we're really feeling, even if our words are saying something totally different.
It's like our bodies are having their own secret conversation right alongside our words. And if we don't pay attention to that, we're missing a big part of what's going on.
Exactly. Deng talks about these things called micro-expressions, which are these tiny facial movements that can give us away, even if we're trying to hide how we feel. And he also talks about how our posture, our tone of voice, even our breathing can give us clues about our emotional state.
So it's like our bodies are these giant flashing signs broadcasting our emotions, whether we want them to or not. But can we really learn to read those signs accurately? It seems like it would take, years of training or something.
Deng thinks we can, and he gives you actual techniques to get better at picking up on those nonverbal cues, both in ourselves and in other people.
So it's not just about watching for those cues, it's about actually using them to communicate better, right?
Yeah. And Deng gives some great advice on how to do that, like how to use your body language to project confidence and come across as genuine.
Okay, give me the inside scoop. What are some of his tips?
Well, one of them is something called power posing. I know it sounds a little out there, but there's research showing that even if you don't feel confident, if you stand or sit in a confident way, it can actually make you feel more powerful.
So you're telling me if I strike a superhero pose for a few minutes before a presentation, I'll actually feel less nervous?
It's worth a try. The research on power posing is pretty interesting. It suggests that our body language can actually change how we feel.
Okay, I'm definitely going to test that out. What else does Deng suggest?
He's also big on eye contact. It seems so simple, but it makes a huge difference. When you make eye contact, you're showing the other person that you're present, you're listening, and you believe in what you're saying.
But too much eye contact can be a bit intense, right?
Definitely. You don't want to freak people out. Deng says the trick is to find a balance. Make eye contact for a few seconds, then look away briefly, then make eye contact again. It's kind of like a dance.
I like that, a nonverbal dance. So eye contact, power posing, what else?
Well, he also talks about paying attention to your tone of voice and your facial expressions. Even small changes in those things can change how your message comes across.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Right. It's all about being aware of how you're coming across, and it takes practice.
Yeah.
But the more you pay attention to those nonverbal cues, the better you'll get at using them to your advantage.
All this nonverbal stuff has me thinking about, written communication, too, Emails, texts, all that. Does Deng have any advice for us digital folks?
He does. He says even though you don't have those nonverbal cues in writing, a lot of the same principles still apply. You've got to be clear, you've got to be concise, and you've got to be respectful, even in a casual email or text.
So no more sending those angry emails to customer service, even when they completely mess up your order.
Nope, not even then. Written communication is forever. Someone could easily misunderstand it or share it with someone else. Deng's advice is to treat every email or text like you would a formal letter. Take your time, think it through, and make sure it's respectful.
That's a good point. It's so easy to just fire off a quick text without thinking about how it might come across.
Exactly. And those seemingly small interactions can really affect your relationships.
This has been so interesting. I'm seeing communication in a whole new light now.
I know, right? Dang's really encouraging us to be more aware of how we communicate, whether it's face-to-face, online, whatever.
It's like he's giving us a set of tools, not just to talk to each other, but to actually connect with each other on a deeper level.
And to build better relationships and create a more positive world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one final thought our listeners can take away?
Dang reminds us that every time we communicate, we're making a choice. We can choose to build bridges, or we can choose to build walls. We can choose to create understanding, or we could choose to create division.
That's a powerful thought. The choice is ours in every interaction every single day. So what will you choose?